I'm Paul Sznewajs. I'm the Executive Director of Ingenuity in Chicago. Thank you for having me. We are an independent nonprofit organization that we like to say serves in a consultative basis to the public school system and the Board of Education. And we were originally created by a consortium of foundations and corporations in Chicago who decided they needed a sector service agency to drive policy change at the local level.
And you're structured as a 501c3?
We are.
I'm Lara Perille from Boston, the CEO of EdVestors. We are also a private nonprofit. We were created as a philanthropic platform focused on urban school improvement. And so I think the most important thing in the arts education context is that we're actually not an arts organization. Mm-hmm. We are focused on improving urban schools. Arts education is one of many issue areas, but we got into arts ed, excuse me, around student engagement, school climate, and family choice of schools as a lever for our broader mission around school improvement. But we were originally set up as a philanthropic platform to draw greater strategic philanthropy into urban school improvement. Over the years, we've added a whole heck of a lot, and I'm looking at my colleague in the audience, Marinelle, of implementation support. So we both make grants on behalf of our donors, but then get in as a school support organization on the ground.
I'm Denise Grande. I'm the Director of Arts Education at the LA County Office of LA County Arts Commission. We are the backbone organization for Arts for All, unit of county government. Arts education is one of 5 divisions in the LA County Arts Commission. But Arts for All is a partnership, a public-private partnership. Our key implementation partner is the LA County Office of Education, and we are funded about 1/3 by the county government and 2/3 by private philanthropy.
Thanks. Good morning, everybody. My name is Lara Davis, and I'm the Arts Education Manager for the Seattle Office of Arts and Culture, so I am employed by city government. I represent the Creative Advantage, which is our local collective impact model for our arts education. So working very closely with our local school district and high leverage community partners, this is a public-private relationship to restore high-quality access to arts learning for students in our region. We have a history in the Office of Arts and Culture through our granting programs of supporting primarily out-of-school time learning opportunities, directly to teaching artists and organizations working with young people, and the Creative Advantage has been our direct foray to make those connections to school day learning for young people.
We're good.
We can share this.
We can share. Okay. I'm Gigi Antoni. I work at an organization called Big Thought in Dallas, Texas. We are a 501c3 private organization, and we coordinate citywide systems that help deliver equitable access to our various forms of arts education across our community, both in school, in out-of-school time, and in the summer. We work with both our city government, our county government, and our public school systems and our charter system, so it's really a very broad. And we have also a growing number of places where kids can access high-quality arts experiences that are community-based. Mm-hmm. So our work is also with churches and community centers and people in neighborhoods who are working with children as well.
So I'd just like to ask, if you were to, I just want you to answer this question. What is the greatest value in your community of your organization? So if you weren't there, what wouldn't happen? What is the value you bring to the children you're trying to serve?
Well, okay, I'll just start since I went last. Well, there are literally hundreds of thousands of children in our city who wouldn't have creative learning experiences every week in our community. So, we have been able to definitely create more access to kids. in the community. I mean, I think that's the highest value. There are many other things that we add value to as well, but I think the bottom line is there are a lot of kids who wouldn't have these experiences if we weren't there. And I want to make it clear, it's not that we are providing these experiences, it's that we are coordinating these experiences. We're making sure they're in the places in our city where the kids need them to be, and we're making sure that they have access to transportation, funding, and a caring adult who can put those experiences into the greater educational context. I think that's how we kind of think about it.
Does somebody else have an answer to that? We don't actually have to go down the line, but yeah.
Well, I was just going to say,
everyone has an answer.
I will be really brief. I just think that the school district can't and won't do it alone, and there is a role for the city and especially the arts office, who is supporting artists and community arts organizations and cultural institutions to help coordinate and align these efforts and really think through the implications of equity. I think that's the biggest, hindrance to access, and both our biggest opportunity for engaging in ways that are culturally relevant, that really draw community voice and young people's voice. And so it's key that we have this partnership that leverages all of the different kinds of resources available in our city to directly impact young people. So I just want to bring in that notion of what is the role and importance of the city's work in this.
So I think some of the same, but with a little different spin, because my immediate response to that was that I think our primary function is to harness the coalition. But when I say that, we have 81 school districts, 88 municipalities in LA County, and a lot of arts providers. Everyone who wants to feel like they're part of a greater effort. So I think that what we offer is the place and the nexus, so that school districts know, oh, there are other school districts here working on this too, can I talk to them? Arts providers know that, oh, right, I can be part of this bigger thing, and that helps my work get better. Classroom teachers know, oh, I don't need to be in the classroom lobbying this for all by myself. So regionally we can connect, but also we can align with statewide efforts and make sure that whatever we're pushing regionally is in line with what the state is trying to move forward with statewide, and that our work in the trenches can sort of move upline and help inform state policy and state practice and state thinking around these issues.
Yeah, I'm going to take a slightly different approach to that as well, and just sort of connect to the themes of policy and advocacy, and then systems change on the ground in cities, which is where most of us are playing. And that's that. So in Boston, over the 6 years of effort, there's 14,000 more kids are now getting art during the school day. There's been nearly a 3-to-1 return on the private investment against increased public funding to sustainability. And then that, in turn, has led to about 120 additional arts teachers over and above those that were already there 6 years ago in the 125 schools. So we did not enter in through the policy door. We entered in through the practice door, to connect to Sue's question earlier and Daniel's comment, because there was policy on the books that was not only unenforced, but unreachable. And I think that's one of the points I want to make, that the approach we took to systems change was actually working with schools as well as cultural partners, but changing the system of supports so that schools could even hope to reach that very lofty policy that was on the books that touched no child's life. And so I think that sort of systems change, that weaving together around practice. So I'd agree with Richard that it's not programs, but it is the systems of support that advances practice inside of schools to meet policy. That away. I'm just going to keep handing all the mics to you.
Trying to contextualize and tighten up an answer here. So I think in some ways it was nice to hear Tish kick off the day, because it reminds us why we're here. And when we sit here and talk about what we do, it's remarkable to me the amount of manpower, time and money that goes into making sure kids can do what Tish does, right? And so that's the conversation we're having today. And for us in Chicago, what is our value proposition as Ingenuity? We can talk about the data and metrics that we provide so there's a better understanding and people can use that to do what they do better. We can talk about how to coordinate and align 800 agencies in Chicago that provide arts every year to Chicago Public Schools. We can talk about advocacy and the policies that we've gotten put in place around staffing levels and arts as a core subject and all of these things. And we can talk about the grant making that we do in providing grants to schools in the district to drive change. But I think at the end of the day, the value proposition that Ingenuity brings to the table in Chicago and our own local, hyper-local landscape is we exist. And the reason we exist is foundations and corporations said, all this change needs to happen. All of us in our own respective areas as philanthropic entities, as the school district, as arts service providers, as teachers, as principals, are so consumed by our day-to-day of doing what we do that there's a greater recognition that larger things need to be done to drive systemic change, and who's going to do that? And so I would say existing is our value proposition.
I want to tie a question to something Daniel, something Daniel was imploring everyone to do, which was to be critical, to practice, to have a critical mind in your work, and I would argue in your life. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to make it actually sort of drive it to the personal, and it makes certainly, and it should connect to conversations you have with your team, with your partners. But in those moments where you're really thinking deeply about the things that go the best, you're looking at your organization, you're looking at your work, and there are certain things that are going extremely well. And so what are those things? And conversely, looking at the things that are going on, the ways in which you're reflecting on the work, you're reflecting on the future. What are those challenges? What are those things that keep you up at night? And if you put the two of them together, I think it'd be kind of interesting to see how this plays across all the organizations.
I'm actually ready to.
Oh, yeah.
I'm ready to answer that because I'm in the middle of a strategic planning process with my organization, so I've been thinking a lot about this question. And we have really come to the conclusion that we have some big check marks off of things that we've been able to accomplish. So we have policies in place now that have forced the district to put certified specialists in every elementary school, and then conversely, by driving demand, we've been able to increase the number of certified art specialists in our middle and high school. So that pathway is something we've been working on since 2005, and we've gotten some sort of great movement in that area. We've been doing a lot of work in out-of-school time. How do you build and get the arts as a major, at a very high quality level, into the out-of-school time system that is becoming more formalized and being built in our community? And how are we at that table? We're making that there's still a lot of work to do there in summer and out-of-school time. But ultimately, what we have concluded is that the balance of our focus on working with our public school partners, which is an important part of our partnership, we've neglected the power of working with our city infrastructure and our community partners to create similarly strong systems of access in that sector in our community, and that we're out of balance, that when we look at the money and the manpower that we're investing in our school partnerships and the return on that investment and the volatility of that system that we're trying to work with, that working in a community forum actually keeps in place through advocacy, through building the ground support for this kind of learning, and with our more difficult public partner, which is our school system, and then also builds important bridges, as Daniel was saying, between what's provided in school and then building those pathways in the community for kids to achieve mastery or to grow their interest into art forms that are not offered in school, like, making movies and, running a garage band and spoken word. I mean, those are things that are not really offered through our specialists, but have real relevance for kids and that they're hungry for. And so we're looking at, have we invested too much? And is there another important element in this city system that we perhaps should be paying more attention to?
There's a lot of things. I was saying to my colleague Randy earlier, I think I'm hypercritical a lot, and and really self-reflective in that way, which I think is important. I think a critical piece of our work in the Creative Advantage is that we have such a strong partnership with the school district. Before this work even began, I mean, it comes off of 5 or 6 years of intentional collaboration that actually brought back into the school district a visual and performing arts position within curriculum instruction, which had been vacant for many, many years. And so the way that we work together, the way that we collaborate is super important. And it helps to hold accountable and is both responsive to the district strategic plan that has all these academic assurances that for the first time calls out the arts and calls out equity and access, and that our work and our plan is very responsive to the way in which young people engage within the school community. Back in 2011, we readjusted to a school assignment plan, so kids are now going to school K-12 within their neighborhood. People were up in arms and really concerned that this was going to resegregate our community, but it brought to light all of the egregious inequities having to do with PTSAs and just other sort of resources that went into schools and not others, and really showed those gaps in access. So I think a critical piece of the work that I think about a lot is how we partner together and how we are both responsive to the construct of the district and what students have access to in their neighborhoods, and how we're pushing the bar to do things a little bit differently. The thing that I think about a lot, that I grapple with in terms of how we're doing what we're doing, is I think this notion of equity, which in this day and age people very comfortably say words like equity and white privilege and racism, but a lot of times, and institutional oppression, but it's like, what does that really mean, and how does that impact and shift the way that we do what we do? We luckily have a city that has a race and social justice initiative. That doesn't mean that it's fully enacted, but I think through our work, we're able to really push the bar on that. So long story short, the Creative Advantage is about systemic impact, right? We're working with the district, we're working with high leverage community partners. How within that work are we making sure that we're engaging inclusive of and dependent on our culturally specific partners, our smaller partners who are sort of FUBU, by and for the communities that they're serving, that they're not just at the table, but they're helping to inform and shape and develop this work, so that they're not just, sort of getting the pieces of it, but they're leaders in it. So that's something that I think about all the time, is our authenticity around what this means in terms of equity.
I just pick up on that.
What she said.
Yeah.
What you said.
Yes,
I mean,
and thank you.
Yeah.
And I'll put it in a nutshell, because it's similar for us. So one of the things we're really thinking hard about and struggling with in a good way is, how do we transfer ownership and voice in order to sustain a movement about what should be expected for all children in schools?
Yes.
And particularly to your earlier point, those children, right? When people talk about this school gets that school gets this, right? So how are we looking at making that a community-owned voice and advocacy? So in the first 5 years of driving this initiative, we really pushed very hard on increasing our leverage as a system influencer to pull all these various players together: philanthropy, nonprofit arts groups, city agencies, and the school systems, and particularly the school levers, the school leaders, and how we could sort of exploit their own system to increase access inside the school. But we're not an arts organization. We're not necessarily going to be on this issue forever. We'll just leave that on the ground. Okay. Thanks. Too tall a stool for a short woman. Thank you.
Always something.
But I think figuring out how to free up and liberate that voice and make it so that parents and students are demanding that that's what they want inside their school. So it's an expectation is the only way we sustain and exploit things like school funding.
Great.
So I'm going to approach this in a completely different way. So if it's the challenges and what keeps me up at night and moving forward. So I stepped into Arts for All at its 10-year mark. So Ayanna Hudson, who's now at the NEA, had my position previously. So I really stepped in taking an initiative, as I see it, from childhood to adolescence. So coming in and being really impressed with what had been built before, but also being given the charge that, okay, the next era needs to take us to full scale. So as I said before, there are 81 school districts. Different than Lara, we did not start with practice. We started with policy and working with each local community and local school district to help them develop their own local policies around arts education and help them with implementation. So I got challenged when I arrived. So what is it? So we're going to go to scale. How long is that going to take? So, okay, do the math, 5 school districts a year. Okay, if we just keep the same pace, that takes us to 2020. But then the realization that a policy and a plan, as we said earlier today, does not arts education make. So moving from this, check the box, they got it, move on, check the box, okay, we're so spinning trying to help these school districts that, like, okay, they did it, just move. So we're very much in a gear-up mode, going from about a $1.6 million budget last year to $2.1 million this year, in a 5-year trajectory to get us to 5.2 in 2020. That's what we think is going to take to build the right ecosystem to sustain this kind of work across our 4,000 square miles of LA County. So it's what's the right suite of resources? And like Gigi said, we also don't provide direct instruction, and nor do we want to. So what are the right resources that will allow school districts and arts providers and arts advocates and funders the opportunity to build their own capacity, their understanding of the issues in this sector, so that everyone's work gets better.
So when I first took the job at Ingenuity, I was at a reception with a bunch of foundations and corporations, and a gentleman who I knew for a long time came up to me and congratulated me on taking the spot, and he said, "Tell me, why'd you take the job?" And I said, I kind of fumbled through an answer, but more or less I said, the opportunity to affect change on a grand scale and help CPS get there appealed to me. And he put his hand on my shoulder and he said, "Paul, let me tell you something. I've been working with CPS for 30 years. CPS doesn't want to be helped." Right? And so when I think about that, in the past handful of years, we've gotten an amazing number of things accomplished at the local level. Policies that have now pushed the arts up to a core subject, which they were not previously. Policies that triple the number of weekly instructional minutes in the arts for K-8 kids. Policies that improve the arts teacher to student ratio from 1 to 750 to 1 to 350. Arts on the principal's job evaluation forms, public accountability measures. And we get a lot of accolades for those things. We get a lot of pats on the back, and we get opportunities, generous opportunities, to come talk about them in forums like this. What I lose sleep over at night is, while all that's well and good, and I say these things to Sydney all the time, is tell me what's different in the classroom right now. Right? If I walk into a school, the same school, if I would have walked in 4 years ago and I walk into that school today, show me what's different. Right? And that's what keeps me up at night. And if you don't see that change in the classroom level, then we're still not doing our job despite all these wins.
Right.
Well, what's the answer? What's the answer? When you go, have you seen it?
Have I seen change?
Yeah.
Yeah, sure, we're starting to, but not in every corner, right? This is about equity. And we draw the same line in the sand that everybody in this room draws, which is this is not a pilot project. Every child, every grade, every week, every school. And so until you get to that, now can you ask yourself, CPS is the 3rd largest school system in the country. In a bureaucracy that size with 400,000 kids, 664 schools, And so is equity achievable? We pride ourselves on having 9 out of 10 schools involved in this initiative, but it's 9 out of 10, right? And so the question is will you ever get 100%? Will you ever achieve equity? And it's something we all strive for. It's something we all shoot for. But that changes really quickly. And I guess the other thing I would add is churn. That's what Tim Knowles down at the Consortium on School Research at the University of Chicago calls churn in public education. Constant change, right? The first year we started this work 4 years ago, there was a contentious labor strike, made national headlines. They fired the CEO in the middle of the school year. They closed 50 schools, and they announced a huge budget deficit. Guess what's happening this year? They're changing the CEO, they're having a huge labor negotiation, and they've got a $1.5 billion deficit. And so I said, my first answer was, our return on investment was we exist. In that ecosystem, we're a flea on the tail of the dog, right? And so what kind of a change can we even expect to affect given who we are and what we have?
You could be a very itchy flea, however.
That's right, and you can move from dog to dog. That's important to remember.
I think we need to drop that.
I love that. I love that. So I just want to ask everybody in this room, how many of you have changed superintendents of your school district in the last 3 years?
More than once.
I mean,
How
you
many
know.
times?
Yeah, how many times?
Yeah, right. That's more than once
Yeah.
in the last 3 years. More than once. Chicago, Seattle. Yeah,
Like 3,
right.
I think.
Boston.
Yes.
Yeah. So I mean that is just this says a lot about the consistency of an organization to outlive or to
Has to last.
or to go from leadership to leadership. And I think that's Gigi.
I think that's right. I mean, it is absolutely the biggest single challenge. I mean, we've been doing this coordination role for, 15 years. And so, literally 10 superintendents in that time in our city. And so that's what I mean by our most difficult public partner is our school. And it's not because they're bad people, or it is just an extremely difficult environment in which not only to get change to happen and get policies and funding in place, but then to keep it there through these changes. I truly believe that the only reason that that happens is because we're also working at this community level. So it's mobilizing the city infrastructure, the mayor's office, so all the way from the influencers level, all the way to parents and all of the people in between. Because if you try to cut Thriving Minds funding out of the Dallas school budget, you're going to get emails and phone calls and people upset about that. And so I think putting the policies in place, the funding, and continuing to work on practice, which is really, really key, because you can't have quality without good practice. So that's where we spend most of our time and money, frankly, is working on the supports around it. But if you're not paying attention to that base of the community, both your partners and your recipients, those things can go away with the change of the superintendent. But, woe be the superintendent who tries to do this in Dallas at this point, because there's just too many people that are engaged in keeping it in place. And I think we have to work in advocacy and policy. We can't just focus on getting it in place. We've got to focus on keeping it there and be really diligent. We've got to collect the data to show that it's waning. We've got to be able to have the supports to make the case, and we have to stay in conversation.
So I have a question about that, and with regards to, I see organizations like this because I believe advocacy is community organizing.
It is.
Yes.
That's exactly what it is.
Thank you for saying that.
So let's talk about that. Let's talk about how each of you aspire to or have done neighborhood, support, or where does that grassroots work come from? Parent support, all of that. And who coordinates that? And do you see that as part of your mission? Or
That's a key part of our ethos, and I think that those opportunities are still growing, and we're getting better at that in terms of the creative advantage and how we've launched our work, and that includes FaceTime with different parent groups and youth-led groups. We luckily in Seattle have some really strong youth-led programs. The Black Student Union at a few of our high schools are leading some incredible movement and organizing around Black Lives Matter, around no matter where you stand on testing, they are leading some incredible conversations, walkouts, and all of these kinds of things. So it creates a really great opportunity for us and our community partners and teaching artists to have FaceTime. And a particular area of our program that I'm thinking has such potential for this sort of kind of community organizing framework is really our professional development. So all of our programs, I imagine, have a focus on growing the quality of the field, so investing in teaching artists and arts organizations and their practice. Our work also includes bringing community arts partners as leaders to support certified teachers, generalists and arts teachers, right, in deepening their practice. We have informally and organically started to bring those folks together, had the opportunity to form some professional learning communities, and because testing and the opt-out movement is so big in Seattle right now, I feel like every time we get these folks together, these teachers and teaching artists in a room, they're starting to have these larger conversations around what is the role of education? How are we supporting each other? How are we making changes? How are we standing up for young people and our parents? And how are we working collaboratively? So I feel like there's this, dare I say, education spring that's happening and is positioning us through the Creative Advantage and as an arts community to be key and central in having those conversations and showing up in different ways that push this like frame of advocacy into the realm of community organizing.
So I'll talk a little bit about some things that we've tried that haven't yielded the success that we wanted, and so where we're moving next. So we partner with our local advocacy organization, Arts for LA, and we contract with them to provide services around advocacy to the field and to really advance our agenda. So I mentioned before that we work with local school districts. We help them build community arts teams to establish a policy and a plan. And initially the idea was, okay, you've got this group of 20 so local advocates, so let's transition that stakeholder group from those that are designing the strategic plan around the arts and move them into being the local advocates for accountability to that plan. But that gets a little tricky because some of those are school district employees. Some art specialists are around the table. Some principals are around the table. General classroom teachers. And then you also have around the table some local cultural partners. And while they want to hold the district accountable, sometimes that can get tricky and seem self-serving as they want a contract. So we tried that. It didn't yield the success that we wanted. They couldn't advocate in the way that we hoped that that would play out. So next we tried, well, maybe let's just invest in certain communities and see if we can't build a coalition deep. Like we did asset maps of in Inglewood. What are all of the organizations in Inglewood that might have a stake in this, and to try to build that energy. And while that had some success, it again didn't yield what we had hoped. So where we're headed now, something we launched this year and will continue next year, is we did a broad scale RFP asking self-selected arts education advocates from across the county to apply to become what we call an activator, so an arts education advocate. And we did a 5-month intensive advocacy training, so they met once a month, almost all day, or for a chunk of hours, to get training in what it means to be a quality advocate, a high-functioning advocate. And then this spring, they are they had developed their own action plan, and now we're carrying forward on that action plan. So they are things like, we have school board election runoffs coming up in a couple weeks, making sure that the candidates are speaking and their position on arts education is known and publicized. So every activator has a different action plan. So by the end of this school year, we'll have almost 40 regional advocates. This is cohort 1. We're envisioning that next year they'll be the leaders of cohort 2, and that over time, throughout the region, that we'll be cultivating and that they'll be the leaders of the work.
So it's a great question. We do not have an obvious community organizing interface in our approach, although a number of us are community organizers by background or orientation. But we have focused in, where our relatively small nonprofit can have leverage on the system influence, but with that community organizing in mind, this issue of parent and youth and teacher voice, which I very much want to come back to, we focused on where can we do two things. Where can we make data and information transparent to the community so that they can become players in accountability, public expectations and accountability. So, district doesn't like to publish lists of where their schools are in terms of arts access. We made that a condition of launching this effort because we're not the district. We're more than happy to be the bad cop in that scenario. And then the other is really liberating back to system leaders what parents want or what kids are saying. So we've invested resources in parent polls, in surveys, in youth voice surveys, and then use that to push it back into the system and decision makers, articulating what parents and kids say they want. And then the third group that's more nuanced, but I think so important, is teachers as a constituency, as a stakeholder group, as an organizing element. A lot of these partnership-oriented expansion efforts can feel like an assault to teachers, like a replacement system, like an outsourced strategy, unless you weave together and centrally emphasize the role of the classroom teacher inside, and hopefully more than one of them, inside school buildings, but then enable them to be the coordinator of partnerships that leverage and enrich that instruction through cultural relevance, through discipline diversity, all those other things that outside partners can bring in, but making sure that their voice feels liberated, because they are also voiceless. And if teachers are voiceless, and I'm not talking about the union, we're a high union town, I'm talking about teachers being voiceless, then arts ed teachers are the most voiceless of the voiceless inside the public system. So making sure that you pull them in is an incredibly powerful strategy.
For Ingenuity, the opportunity, so we exist, and I kind of alluded to earlier, to try to be sort of strategically and deliberately opportunistic, right? And so in that sense, the first big opportunity came to us about a month after we were created. Mayor Emanuel got elected in office, and just like this recently happened in Boston, it was the first mayoral transition in 25 years in the city of Chicago. And when Mayor Emanuel came in, he asked for this succession of plans be created for the city, an economic plan, an infrastructure plan, and a cultural plan. And it was the first time since Harold Washington was in office 25 years ago that the city created a cultural plan. And so Commissioner Boone, Michelle Boone of the Department of Cultural Affairs and Special Events, was charged with going out and talking to everybody in the city. She held 40 public town hall sessions in every community center, park district facility, some downtown and museums, to ask the citizens of Chicago, come one, come all, what should our city's cultural priorities be for the next 10 years? And lo and behold, after 4 or 5 of those meetings, arts education started floating to the surface. And so Ingenuity, as the advocacy organization, took that as the opportunity to call our network of 800 agencies to say, hey, you work in this neighborhood, in this neighborhood, in this neighborhood, in this neighborhood, and those sessions are happening. Why don't you send your parents, whose children are the beneficiaries of your program, to talk about the value of those arts in your schools? And lo and behold, arts education is the #1 priority of the citywide cultural plan for the city of Chicago. That begat the creation of the first ever CPS Arts Education Master Plan, which begat the creation of all those policies I mentioned earlier. So.
Excellent.
I want to explore something that's come up here. So talk to us about the issue of common cause, because common cause really started emerging here. Common cause with district officials, common cause with parents, common cause with teachers. The teacher union started to emerge here. A little less school districts, board members. Most cities have an array of public education advocacy groups. Most of the teachers' unions have pretty strong government affairs operations. So where are you in that point of partnering with other established, and it's often likely that those are better established, better funded, bigger organizations that are advocating for change in public schools, where you think there's common cause, where maybe you haven't gotten yet, but it's that sort of moment where you're looking at something and wondering, how do we connect? And it could be difficult. And I would add one twist on it just to make it a little more complex of a question. I had always thought I had experienced myself and also had heard many times about the complexities of working with district officials, particularly district officials charged with overseeing arts education. And I always thought that one of the central challenges in this was that that person who might be the district arts coordinator basically would be in a position where if they really were going to do their job right, they would basically have to cede some authority for what they're held responsible for. And I think it's a very difficult thing to do just by human nature. That they're looked at by the supervisors as being responsible for an area, they're held accountable for this area. But in partnering with and making common cause, if it's really going to be a partnership, they have to be able to give up control. And you have to understand control in different ways. And I've seen some people who are very, very savvy at this, and I've seen some people who have sought to undermine these kinds of systems. So I wanted to throw, these are two very different sort of takes on how you engage with important stakeholders. So again, I've given you a nice big landscape.
Glad you asked that question.
All right, so I guess I'll just flip the first answer because we are that organization, right? So we're the Urban School Improvement Organization and not the arts group, and it was a little odd for us to wade into the space. The reason we did is that as a philanthropic platform, 5 years in the 5 years prior, we already knew that our donors were deeply interested in arts ed, and we ourselves were funding alternative delivery models, is what we were really looking at, different ways that schools were creatively getting art back into the school day, you know, instead of the past 10 years of that had been complaining about the federal and state
hold on to
cuts.
this way.
Thank you. So that, but it made us more of a neutral broker in a very complicated landscape, and so I think that was incredibly helpful.
So I'm not going to talk about the arts coordinator piece. I'm going to mention what I think was most strategic that we did in terms of the common cause. And 2013, so this was the first year, the governor of California really dramatically changed the way education in California is funded across the board. And so, and a lot of the education reform movements were stepping forward because the governor said, we're going to let each local school district decide how they spend their money. They removed all categoricals at the state level, so we don't actually argue on behalf of categoricals anymore for arts education. We actually think it's a detriment. But removing all categoricals and putting in 8 state priorities, and I'm not going to remember them all, but things like student engagement, parent engagement, equal access to coursework, improved student outcomes. So things that the arts community could all get behind. When we knew that those were the 8 state priorities, we partnered with the California Alliance for Arts Education, who's doing the great work on Title I. We partnered with the Arts for LA, our advocacy organization, and tried to get out in front of it. We convened a focus group that had some superintendents and some arts coordinators and some parents and some community advocates around what is emerging in your school district. Of those 8 priorities, what are the things that are most coming up that your district is going to put forward as the key ideas you need to advance? And then, as a group, we brainstormed, okay, so how can the arts help you achieve those goals around improved student engagement, around parent involvement, around improved student outcomes? And then we took the template that the state was requiring all school districts to fill in, around these 8 priorities and gave suggestions for it to provoke initial conversation. So if parent engagement is where your district is putting a lot of its energy, then what are some art strategies that can provoke you as a district to start thinking about how you might use the arts in that arena? And we did that for all 8 priorities. We did it hand in hand with our local and state partners. And then the education reform effort, EdTrust West in California, put that up on their website. It went statewide. It also went on the State Board of Education website. So not just regionally, but statewide, others could access it. And then as a follow-up to that, when these plans were all submitted to the state, we did an analysis of the 81 in LA County and tracked that 77% of them actually included some art strategies in their local improvement plans. And 32% of those identified that this was more or improved activity based on the year prior. So that's, again, some systemic work around that.
So I just want to, I'm really glad this topic came up because I wanted to comment on Daniel's last comment of his presentation. This idea of finding your friends in the community. They may not be your arts and education friends, but they're your friends that are wanting to close the opportunity gap for kids. They're your friends in the community that have a quality education or school reform agenda and are actively engaged in that. And one of the things that we did was we actually re-articulated our mission as an organization in order to position ourselves to be able to make connections with this broader civic agenda. So Big Thought's mission is to make imagination a part of everyday learning. And our vision statement is that we envision a community where every child has an opportunity to imagine, create, and succeed. So there's no word art in there, and there's no arts education in that mission. We have a mission that is about what we want to make happen for kids. And there are many people in our community that we can connect to. United Way has become a huge connected partner. They have a very similar agenda for kids. Our collective action, like our Strive, it's called Commit in Dallas, is a very big strategic partner in the work that we're trying to do now. The truth is, I said, it's been so long since I've been to an arts conference that it's so cool to see my tribe again, right? To be in a room with people who are talking about arts education, because I find that I don't actually talk about that a lot anymore. I talk about creative experiences, and I work with the science community, and I work with the out of school and the summer learning loss community. Those are my key strategic partners in getting creative learning and arts back in the lives of the kids in my community. So I can't say enough about the importance of both lending our power to their cause, because we have a lot of power in our communities because of the nature of the work that we do, the boards that we interact with. Lifting that issue up in a much broader way than talking about just the arts is really given us a lot of traction, and it's helped tremendously in meeting our goals.
Yeah. I'm glad that you bring that up. Makes me think about some of the things that are happening in Seattle. This has become an opportunity for us to come together as a collective across the creative youth development spectrum. So we have libraries, parks and rec, YMCA. We have a group called the Youth Development Executives of King County that has a whole roadmap plan for our south end schools and also districts that are in the southern part of King County, which is the county that Seattle is in. And I think that opportunity to expand that sort of continuum of learning for young people across sectors where these folks have deep power and prominence within the community with a different lens and a broader lens of education, having us be within that is really powerful. Of course, there's League of Education Voters and Alliance for Education and these other groups in Seattle that are doing larger work around advocacy and litigation. that I think we have an opportunity to be more connected with. Those are the bigger players. And I would say even in-house, at the City of Seattle, we have a newly formed Department of Education and Early Learning. It used to be the Office for Education, and it has grown from, 8 staff to like 50 staff because of the focus on early learning. And the mayor has deemed these folks sort of the lead of education for the city. And in Seattle, we fund education through levies because that's how we do things. And so the voters passed a $260 million levy in 2011, and arts organizations were effectively locked out of that. And there was a lot of uproar from the community around that. So it has been our goal and our strategy to build authentic relationship with that department so that unlocks those public dollars for our partners, and we can begin to see, again, going back to this notion of not being so separate, but we're talking about creative learning and high quality learning. How are we assumed to be a part of that? And so that key partnership with that group that has a lot of leverage and prominence within the city, that is looked at as the education lead, has been a really important part of our work.
So I would say, there's a story, I wasn't present, but there's a story of when the consortium of foundations and corporations who kind of got this ball rolling in Chicago were doing their due diligence, and they had flown out to Los Angeles and were listening to them talk about the work that they were doing. This is a number of years ago. And the presenters from LA kept saying, well, we did this, we did that, we did this, we did that. And so finally someone from the Chicago contingency raised their hand and said, who's we?
Yeah, right.
And it became evident that the we was literally everybody.
Yeah.
Right? And so when you ask the question of who are you partnering with, in Chicago, I'll admit, like in closed rooms, I've been known to roll my eyes at the term collective impact, right? And so when
The only one.
Nobody else does that.
Nobody knows.
But that being said, the way things organically have unfolded in Chicago, it started with the philanthropic sector, who organized the cultural sector, who then organized the education sector, who then organized the civic leadership, who then organized City Hall. It's kind of been collective impact, right? And so everybody has owned a piece of that. And as the work has evolved, in any given moment in time, somebody needs to step up and fill a certain void. And that keeps happening over and over and over again from a different corner. Right?
That's great.
And so that's a big part of it. To the second half of your question about the Department of Arts Ed, it's interesting the way you framed it, like seeding, how'd you put it?
To give up some
Ceding control, right.
authority for what they're held responsible for.
Yeah, so it's interesting because that, to me, it kind of drives into this notion of ownership, like who owns this work, right? And the fact of the matter is you got to get over that, right? Is everybody owns the work, and we do our part, and the Department of Arts Ed certainly does their part. We work with them, but we couldn't get done half the things they get done in the district if it weren't for them. Same goes for the foundations and corporations and everybody else I rattled off earlier. So to me, it's less about ceding power, and it's more about stepping up when you're needed. And so that's the way we kind of take it.
Can I just pick up on two?
I want to move to some questions. I think what we should do now is have lunch. But now you know who all these people are. You can, if you have individual questions for each of the different cities and what they're doing and what their programs are, that's why they're here as a resource for you. I also want to say that organizations that are advocacy and policy and programmatic, but primarily advocacy and policy issues, take extraordinary leadership. And the idea is always a good one, to have an organization like that. Sometimes you don't hire the right person and then you think it was a bad idea. The idea was always a good one. This is an example. These 5 people up here are an example of extraordinary leadership, and I'll start with Gigi, who has been really the cornerstone of this work for many years. But leadership is key because it is such a complex because of the nuances that we have to deal with in policy, because of the top down and the bottom up and the community organizing and the mayors and the boards and the I mean, just it's like it's very complicated, and leadership is absolutely critical. And I think that I want to just point out Randy, who's not up here, but Creative Advantage would not be here today if it weren't for him at the Seattle Office of Arts and Culture,
Janet,
whatever it's called.
It's fine.
Janet, I'm actually dying to say something. Do you mind?
No,
if I
no, please.
Can I just have just 1 minute? Because it is about just leadership. We haven't talked, none of us have really talked about the role that private philanthropy has played in the work that we do. And I just can't leave here without just talking just a little bit about that. And so, none of the work that any of us have done, I think if you will allow me to speak for us, we are in conversation with each other, is possible without substantial and sustained commitment and partnership with our private sector philanthropy partners. I mean, that is a very, very important and key role. And Big Thought was so privileged to be a part of the funding that the Wallace Foundation did around this work. And that national money coming into our community leveraged a tripling of that investment from our private sector funders, from individuals, foundations, corporations. It electrified the community around this work. And then not only that, but they were and continue to be, our funding community, Wallace and others, very critical friends and thought partners and the bringers of a bigger picture into our community. I think the leadership that the private sector pulled together is really the key and catalyst to the leadership that the organizations have been able to achieve. And I just think it's super important to say, particularly in front of this group of people. So
And
thank you, Janet,
I would like to add too,
for a few minutes to say that. Thank you.
I'd like to add too, there's one last anecdote. So I was talking several months ago to a friend and colleague of ours, Tom Wolf, out in Boston, and he was doing another study on arts education, and I was kind of relaying and conveying what was going on in Chicago, and we were kind of shooting the breeze a little bit. And Tom has been around, as you go, those you know Tom, he's been around the block, and he's seen a lot of this stuff come and go over the years.
He makes me look young.
And one of the comments that Tom made to me is, after I kind of exhausted my story, is he said, well, that's really great. He's like, here's the thing I found, Paul. In every city in the United States, over the past 30 years, an individual or entity or a group of individuals or group of entities has come along in a particular city to push change for arts education. And then the policies and practice spike up in that city. And then everybody relaxes and assumes that's the new normal. And then the funders who are at the table walk away from the agency or entities that were doing it. And everybody shifts their attention to something else, and it drops back down again, and 10 years later it starts over.
Sustained commitment.
So it's all about keeping everybody at the table all the time, not just you guys, but everybody at the table. City leadership, philanthropy, teachers, everybody.
Right.
And that's what should keep us all up at night.
That's right.
We're in this deliberation.
Okay. Thank you all.